When Canada accepted a combat role in Afghanistan, the Church was also pulled to the front lines. On today's Catholic Focus, we speak to our chaplains, as well as the superior of Afghanistan's lone Catholic mission. We explore the psychological toll of combat, and we meet a military family whose loss leads them on an ancient Spanish pilgrimage and back to Afghanistan. In October 2001, the Taliban was deposed from power in Afghanistan. Canada joined the efforts to rebuild the country and provide security by providing 2,500 troops, many of whom are serving in the more dangerous southern region. As those of us back home read headlines of IEDs and suicide bombers, it's very difficult for us to imagine the horrors that both Canadians and locals must experience. Today's guests have all been profoundly affected by the war in Afghanistan, but they have not surrendered to despair. In fact, for these next guests, it's their very duty, their job, to help recover hope. These men and women are Canada's military chaplains.
Almost as long as there have been wars in the Christian era, there have always been some people to spiritually support troops, going back to the Middle Ages. But more recently, in recent wars, in the First, Second World War, Korean, there have always been chaplains with the troops, and even on the front lines. Though commanders told them not to go to the front lines, they felt that's where they belonged.
I think all units need a padre. In regards to my unit, this is the battle group for the task force, which is leaving in the summer of '08. They will be pretty much in the front line, right? So they need all the support that they can get. Going for deployment, you need to be prepared, from the physical aspect, from the spiritual, emotional, psychological. So physical, I have to join the members of my unit when they do their physical training.
There's a kind of an extension of God's hand that is there through the chaplain, and so he does a lot of counseling. They accompany the injured, sometimes to hospitals. They make the announcements of fatalities and death. They support the families under all circumstances, and especially in situations of death, to walk with the family.
The biggest challenge was to deal with casualties. I am a human being too. I have my emotions, and I have my strength and weaknesses too. So sometimes it is one thing to comfort soldiers and to be that person who brings calmness to their chaotic situations. But other times I also felt lonely, whereby I needed to tap into my spiritual resources for comfort.
Basically, I'm a traveler. I'm a visitor of God, let's say, or in the name of the Lord. And so I go and visit the people wherever they are in the country, and at that same time visit with the chaplains and support them in their important work. And also out of country, wherever our troops are, my diocese extends there as well.
Obviously, spiritual solace is not always sufficient to help soldiers cope with their experiences. There's been a growing awareness that our servicemen have unique psychological needs that perhaps haven't always been met. Joining us in studio to talk about this is Dr. Mark Zamorsky, who is head of Deployment Health Section of the Canadian Forces. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
We hear so much in the news about post-traumatic stress disorder. What exactly is PTSD?
Well, PTSD is one of a number of common mental health problems that can occur in people who are exposed to traumatic events. By traumatic events, I mean things like an assault, an armed robbery, a natural disaster, or of course, a combat experience as a soldier or exposure to atrocities during peacekeeping. The main feature of PTSD is the intrusive re-experiencing of the traumatic event long after it occurred. And that can take the form of nightmares, flashbacks, etc. To be formally diagnosed with PTSD, you have to have that intrusive re-experiencing plus a number of other features in order to get that formal diagnosis And again, PTSD is not the only disorder that can occur.
And what are some of the other mental health afflictions experienced by soldiers?
Well, probably the most obvious one is depression,
Okay.
Major depression, which can occur in conjunction with PTSD as well as an isolated disorder. Substance abuse problems also occur in the aftermath of traumatic events, largely but not exclusively in the context of trying to cope with another mental health problem. And those are probably the disorders for which there's the best evidence and the clearest and most consistent evidence.
Among the public, there is this perception out there that soldiers are insufficiently cared for their mental health needs. Is this view justified?
Well, it's no longer justified. We recognized in the mid-90s and late 90s that we did not have a system that did a good job at responding to the needs of service members who were coming back with mental health problems. And we very publicly acknowledged that that was a problem, and we have undertaken a whole number of steps to try to fix that. And right now, I think we have a system that's very strong and that we can be very proud of as Canadians.
For those of us who have never experienced war, it's hard for us to even imagine, to contemplate having killed someone. How do soldiers cope with this experience, even when they know very well that they're justified in having done this?
Well, I think, different people cope in different ways, and different people need different things at different times. And by and large, what we encourage soldiers to do is to use whatever kinds of tools they've used in the past that have worked for them when they've been dealing with difficult events. And people, again, have very different needs. There's a large group of people who seem to be able to put these experiences behind themselves very, very effectively with remarkably little effort.
And how do they do so? Both when they're still abroad and when they've returned home?
We really don't know. It's an interesting thing, but this whole phenomenon of resilience is not well understood, and there's not even a commonly accepted definition of what it is. Certainly, there are certain ways of approaching problems, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of reacting to problems that are associated with more favorable mental health than others.
Okay. And how might the mourning process for soldiers be unique in that they're away on combat, one of their comrades with whom this is their life has died? What is unique about their mourning experience?
Well, very interesting question, and there's a lot of international discussion around this issue, but again, remarkably little scientific evidence for it.
Okay.
And that's I can speculate just a little bit, and probably you could as well. But first and foremost, our soldiers may not have the ability or the time to grieve because the mission has to go on.
Okay.
And they have to keep on fighting, and they don't have the luxury of being able to take a prolonged period to sort of pull themselves together. They also may not feel safe experiencing strong emotions while they're still in a combat zone, and that may be a good choice for many of them. The circumstances under which deaths occur influence the grieving process. So the grieving process is different if you lose your wife after a prolonged battle to cancer versus losing a buddy in a roadside bomb attack or something like that. Soldiers are also in a position where they're trained to feel responsible for one another. It's a huge part of their training, and to watch out for one another. And for that reason, when bad things happen to their buddies, there's this natural tendency for people to take the blame on themselves. And those are just a few of the possible hypotheses about how grieving might be different, but there's been remarkably little research.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mark.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
Certainly the grieving that might be the most arduous is that of a parent whose son or daughter has died in war. Here's the story of one family whose grieving took them along the millennial-old path of the Camino de Santiago.
He was very good company. I loved his company because he was funny. He used to torment me.
With the people around here, actually, he would have a beer with me and then he would leave. And I would watch him and I'd think, why would you go across and have a beer with a neighbor? Like, Tom's the same age as me.
He liked the older guys' company.
In 2006, Errol and Elaine were preparing to walk the arduous Camino de Santiago pilgrimage, also known as the Way of St. James. There, they would pray for their 21-year-old son William, whose Petawawa, Ontario battalion was deployed to Kandahar.
We were flying out on the 8th of September. So on the Sunday morning on the 3rd, I got up 7 o'clock, said to Elaine, are you coming for a walk? Because we were kind of just trying to get ourselves acclimatized and accustomed to walking. And she says, no, I'm going to stay in bed today. So I went on my own, and I was about 8 kilometers away from here at the time. I heard a car coming up behind me, which is in the farming area. The vehicle was going slower and slower, and I was thinking, come on, buddy, hurry up and get by me here. And then I turned, and he pulled up beside me, and it's my neighbor, Tom Atkins, and he says, the military sent me to get you. And I said, what do you mean the military? What military? Like, did they call you on the phone or something? He said, no, they're at your house. I said, oh, Tom, don't tell me that. Because that's the only way. The military they'll make call and tell you somebody's injured, but they come and tell you to your face when your son's dead. And then he's crying, saying, they've killed Will, they've killed Will. And I got home, and then, well, you know what happened when you were here, not me, but that's how I found out.
I looked out the bedroom window and I could see the 2 soldiers, and William always told me that they come to your door, Mum, if I get killed. You don't get a phone call, obviously someone comes to your door. So when I looked out the window, my brain is like, no. So I got back into bed. They walked around the neighborhood for an hour. Because I just thought in my mind, if I didn't let him in, then
Tom knew.
I don't have to hear that William's
dead. He told
dead.
his wife, and Tom was crying. He said he started to run across the road, and he saw Elaine open the door and collapse.
Yeah, it's a horrendous job for when they have to come and tell somebody, because I did literally hit the guy.
As far as how he felt, was he frightened? I think would go without saying. I don't think it's much fear, but the thought is always there in the back of the guys' minds that something could happen.
It was only the second day of NATO's Operation Medusa, Canada's largest combat operation since the Korean War. The goal of the early morning mission was to capture a Taliban stronghold in the Panjwai district, 15 kilometers west of Kandahar. The insurgents, though certainly outgunned, held a strong defensive position and were lying in wait for the approaching Canadians, who had believed the enemy had withdrawn. Cushley's battalion was now surrounded on 3 sides, as the Taliban launched rocket-propelled grenades and recoilless rifle fire.
They were pulling back out of the field, trying to get out of this ambush because they said it was absolutely crazy. And then William's Lav crashed in a ditch. And so from there, when they tried to retrieve it and they couldn't, so then it was basically on your feet and fight your way out through the fields. And so it was hand-to-hand fighting, and it's not the kind of battle I would envisage where you see like lots of people. They're in a marijuana field where they can't see people. No. And they say at most times you're not more than 20 meters away. And you see these guys run through the fields, they're firing at you, the rockets are coming in.
Warrant Officer Rick Nolan and Engineer Sergeant Shane Stachnik were killed in their vehicles.
Warrant Mellish came running forward, said his intention was to run in and pull the body out. And my son was one of the ones that, he was a machine gunner, so he jumped up, and a few of the other guys jumped up, and then a recoilless shell come crashing in and it knocked them all over, but killed my son and Mellish.
William had been in Afghanistan for only 24 days.
Starts off actually right at Trenton after the repatriation of the bodies.
Yeah.
But people, you could see them running over the overpasses, over the highway, so they could be there to salute when the 5 bodies came underneath that day. People are lining the streets. There were 3 bikers. These are hardcore bikers. They had the patches and everything on, and they were standing at the gate saluting.
I'm crying.
And as they went away, one of the guys literally collapsed, crying in grief. All the children in the school were lined up the side of the road and were flowing flowers. His coffin as it went by. There must have been 600 or 700 people following his coffin. The VFW had an honor guard from the States, and they presented us with an American flag, and we've since found out the last time that was done was the Korean War. We went to Afghanistan because that was the right thing. My son believed in it. I believe in it. I believe, even though, as somebody said to me, given the Faustian bargain, would I have my son back and forget the war over there, give him this country if I had to? No, the answer is no. My son knew he could be killed over there.
Yeah.
But he felt it was something he had to do. I'm proud of what he did. And I'm proud to support that mission out there. And that's how I feel about it.
I had a priest over, and actually we were having a discussion, and I said to him, I really hate God right at this moment. I just hate him. And he said to me, why do you hate God? I said, because he killed Will. And he said, no, he didn't. You know, the Taliban killed Will, not God. And it actually stuck with me, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And I think about that, the answer that he gave me with that quite often. Because you do. I think everybody blames God. Like, what are you thinking? You know, you could. Why didn't you stop it? You can't stop it. And the priest was right. It wasn't God that killed him. It's what he was fighting, the war.
1 year later, Errol again felt compelled to walk the Spanish Camino.
It was hard. Nothing could have prepared me for the pilgrimage. There's a place called the Cruz de Ferro, and there's the pile of stones there, and the pilgrims for 2,000 years, have placed a stone there on their way through. And, well, we had a stone for ourselves, like pebbles off the beach from here. You bring them from your homeland and place them there. And we also had one for William. And so the thing was, that stone still had to be placed on that pile, even if it was late. And every day I would say, as soon as I get rid of this stone, although it was a tiny pebble, it was like a ton in my backpack. And every day I'd say, as soon as I place this stone, that's it, I'm quitting, I'm going home, I'm not going to do this, I heard too much. And after I placed the stone, I suddenly found I needed to finish it then. I suppose you can say, I suppose at that point, maybe that's the first time I've really felt my son, and he must have been the person pushing me.
I think William wanted you to.
I think William
did.
He knew we were going to do it. And he used to say to me, you're a crazy old man, Pops. You are just crazy. And telling us that I was a crazy old man, stuff like that. He had actually been bragging to his friends about what we were going to do.
Elaine stayed at home because she had applied to serve the troops at the Tim Hortons at Kandahar Airfield. Though a health complication delayed those plans, Elaine's stepdaughter Amanda, William's sister, began a 6-month stint at the Kandahar Tim Hortons in December 2007.
Spiritually, I suppose
I think we've grown.
We've grown that way.
Yeah.
I'm Catholic. Yeah.
And I'm starting to, my mother wouldn't like me very much, but I am starting to look to the Catholic faith a bit more because I found that gave me the most peace in the church.
I suppose everything has a purpose and a reason. What this reason was, I don't know, but
I think it's to learn from. Because as bad as this is, I mean, it's the worst possible thing to lose your child. And William was my only child. Maybe we're supposed to learn something from this. Like maybe if I can help other families because I've gone through the steps, because it's a hard grieving process.
We're back on Catholic Focus as we bring a Catholic perspective to the war in Afghanistan. There's few individuals who are as invested in the war-torn country as my next guest. Father Giuseppe Moretti, a Barnabite priest, is the only priest who is permanently stationed in this country. And we have him on the phone from Kabul. Hello, Father Moretti.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you to you.
Your mission is the only Catholic mission in Afghanistan. How was this established?
The church inside the Italian embassy is a privilege received by African government as a gratefulness because the Italian government was the first Western government who recognized the independence of Afghanistan after the Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919. So the church was established here in 1921, but the beginning of the apostolate, the pastoral presence, was in 1933. So next year is 75th anniversary of our presence here.
And you had to flee the country. Why did you have to do so?
When I was injured during the combat among the different factions or groups of the Mujahid in 1994.
Okay.
So I was obliged to leave, and I came back by order of John Paul II in 2002.
And who do you serve at this Mission Sui Juris? Are there Catholic converts in Afghanistan?
But listen, there are not Catholics among the Afghan people, and I don't know if there are some converts in a secret, but I don't think so. The presence of the Catholic in Afghanistan is composed only of by international Catholic community, by the foreigners.
The NATO mission has now been going on for many years in Afghanistan. Do you see the state of the country improving?
Undoubtedly, Afghanistan is improving in the way of democracy, but the way is very slow, very difficult, very long and narrow. But we can't abandon all hope. Never, never. We must help this country as other poor countries in the world in the way of peace, democracy, and so on.
As you know, there are many Canadians who are serving in Afghanistan, many of them Catholic. What message would you have to those Canadian Catholics who are serving in the country?
Listen, first of all, I would remember the 72 Canadian soldiers died in Afghanistan and voice their families, the prayers and the solidarity of our international Catholic community, likewise our deep thankfulness for the many Catholics serving in your army. I would say this message: don't be ashamed of being believers. You know, in this situation of times, it's very difficult to profess courageously a faith. So don't be ashamed of being believers. And heartfelt thanks for your presence in Afghanistan to build peace, democracy, and solidarity. I know it's a great sacrifice of human lives for your country. Really heartfelt for the Canadian presence here, not only in a military way, but also political and diplomatic way. God bless you, but pray for us.
We certainly will be praying for you, Father Moretti. Thank you very much. We are out of time. It has been an honor to speak with you, and thank you for sharing your inspiring mission with Canada.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you as well to our viewers at home. Canada's mission in Afghanistan is certainly one that stirs many emotions and hopefully stirs us to prayer as well. We do want to hear your comments and your questions about this topic. Please send them to us at focus@saltandlighttv.org. For Catholic Focus, I'm Kris Dmytrenko.